world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, December 8th. And of course, we got a lot to talk about. We always have a lot to talk about. Now, this podcast is going to be coming to you a little later than I would have liked, but life got in the way again and working on resolving some of those issues. So hopefully, you start getting the podcast earlier in the day. But today is what it is, and we're going to get into it. We got a lot to talk about, as always. Now, even though yesterday was Sunday, it's the beginning of a week today, we got some things we are watching. Supreme Court is going to be hearing a case, or they heard a case today, actually, by the time this is going to get published, where they were looking at whether or not President Trump has the ability to fire certain people for certain boards and things like that without cause, congressional approval, all of those kind of things. Now, I'm not 100% sure of the scope of those oral arguments. I have not looked into them yet. I will hopefully have a chance to look at them tonight and maybe be talking about it tomorrow. But they're looking as to whether or not the president or any president can just do that. So we're watching that. Now, we are waiting for a Supreme Court decision that could come at any time on Donald Trump and these tariffs. And I don't think they side with Donald Trump, but then we got to watch and see what the Supreme Court says about the tariffs that are already paid. Remember, we've collected 400, maybe 450 billion, I think, by some estimates at the top end with these tariffs. What happens to all of that money? Now, Donald Trump wants to send out tariff rebate checks to American citizens, but we haven't actually received that much money. And of course, Donald Trump is always inflating how much he says we have earned from those tariffs. One of the numbers he's pulled out has been like 15 or 16 trillion dollars, something like that, which isn't even close to accurate. But in order to send out any sort of a rebate check, Congress would have to approve it. It is not something that Donald Trump can just do. Remember during his first administration during COVID, when they sent out the COVID checks, Congress had to pass it. And they passed it bipartisan because Democrats had control of the House of Representatives. So it wasn't just a Republican thing, but then those checks were delayed because for the people getting paper checks and for the letters that went out explaining why you or how you got that benefit, Donald Trump wanted to make sure he had his signature on it so you knew where the money was coming from, even though it was not required by law. So I don't know if there's going to be a tariff rebate check. I don't think there will be, because we don't have a surplus of money, right? We operate from a deficit. We are deficit spending. We bring in less money every year than what we need to spend. So we are constantly borrowing money. And the way this system works is money comes in and then it goes right back out to pay interest on a loan or to pay a bill or whatever the case may be. And then we need to go get more money. They don't have, like, stockpiling money from the tariffs and setting it aside doesn't work. It reminds me of trying to play Monopoly, actually, what Donald Trump thinks is going on. And I remember being a kid trying to sit there and shuffle my money into separate piles. Like, well, this is exactly what I got from my rent on properties versus this is what I got from everything else, and not wanting to spend the rent money on anything else if I didn't have to. And it would always work for a little while, but it never worked long term. I tried it every time, playing, and it didn't work. And that's what Donald Trump thinks is going on with these tariffs, that the money is going into a separate pile. And he keeps saying, well, they found a whole bunch of tariff money just sitting on a shelf. There's no shelf in the Treasury because there's technically no money in the Treasury because we're in deficit spending. It goes out as fast as it comes in. So we're wondering what the Supreme Court is going to do with these tariffs. Are they going to, if they overturn it, like I think they will, because the Constitution is pretty clear. It says that the power to impose tariffs is with Congress. And the law that Donald Trump is pointing to does not mention the word tariff or any of its synonyms anywhere in it. And that is what the lower court ruled on. So they're probably going to side against Donald Trump and say the tariffs are illegal. And then, more than likely, all of the money that was collected is going to have to be repaid, which means the United States is going to have to borrow more money to pay it back. Problem is, what happens with those paid back tariffs? How do they get back to the people who actually paid them? Do they go back to the consumer? Well, how? How do you prove what you paid in tariffs? You can't. Not really, unless you paid it directly and you've got a receipt from paying it. But just because your prices went up at the store, how do you prove you paid excess amount of tariffs? It's going to be a challenge. So it's going to go back to the companies that paid it. And I know how big business thinks. Big business is going to sit there and go, yay, free money. That's what they're going to do. They're going to say, yay, free money, and add it to the bottom line because that's how they think. So I could easily see these companies just putting it on the bottom line, calling it free money, and saying, hey, congrats to our executives who made us all this extra money this year, and patting them on the back, giving them big bonuses. Now, realistically, that money should either go back to the customers by lowering prices, or it should go back to at least the employees at the ground level and giving them raises, et cetera. But they're not going to do that. They only care about the people at the top. Now, a lot of you that follow me also follow the Rational Boomer, and you might have saw recently Ed was back on. And one of the things he was talking about is when Democrats are back in power, they need to start going after trusts and breaking up monopolies. And I think they need to do a little more of that. You know, we used to bust up big companies that have gotten too big and got out of hand. And they're not doing that anymore. And this ties into what I'm talking about with these tariffs, where they give these big bonuses to these executives, where these executives are making hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in some cases, all sorts of bonuses. And you got a company like Walmart, one of the biggest retailers in the world, and yet you have a large number of their employees qualifying for government assistance. And that shouldn't happen, right? Not when you're making that kind of money, the kind of money Walmart does. And maybe they need to look at going after some of these bigger businesses again. We have had numerous cell companies. Used to be we had multiple cell companies, for example. And, I remember 20 years ago we had Singular, we had AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, I think I said US Cellular, and a bunch of others. And they've slowly started merging back together. A couple of years ago, Sprint merged with T-Mobile, and now I'm seeing, I think US Cellular has merged with T-Mobile. So effectively, you have T-Mobile and you have AT&T, and Verizon. You have three, but they've got such a monopoly on the big markets. And yes, there's some competition, but maybe they need to look at branching it out again and saying, okay, we're getting out of hand. Same thing with all of these other companies. We've got too many people or too many companies that own so many other things. And we need to look at that and go, okay, can we branch these out? Are they too big? And must they split off in some cases? You've got one company, Sinclair, holding a bunch of the local media stations around the country. Um, and they're putting pressure now on the actual parent networks. Remember, that was one of the companies that was trying to force, was it Kimmel? Yeah, Jimmy Kimmel. ABC, they were trying to force Disney to not bring back Jimmy Kimmel. And now it ultimately backfired because lots of people turned around and told ABC Disney exactly what they thought by canceling Disney Plus and Hulu and saying, yeah, we're not coming back. Tourism at the parks are down and things like that. And Disney went, oh shit, we got to do something. So they brought Kimmel back. I think that the Democrats do need to look at going after some of these big businesses. Now, it's ironic that the Democrats are going to be the ones looking at big business because one of the biggest users of the monopoly busting was, I believe, Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican. And they would go after and they broke companies apart. I mean, if you're of a certain age, you remember a time before Fox really became a news network. I didn't quite understand what was going on. Not Fox News, I should say Fox as a local station. Um, didn't quite understand what was all going on. I just knew, hey, there's another channel to watch. Cool. Because I was a kid, but the whole thing, they used to break these companies apart. You know, what was it? AT&T. AT&T, I think, had a big chunk, and then they got broken up into multiple companies, and that's how we got Sprint. At one point. We need to start looking at doing that again. We shouldn't be allowing all of these companies to merge and join together and get bigger and bigger and bigger again. Look at, Netflix is now trying to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. Okay, they get all of Warner Brothers, but right now they don't have access to the networks, but they're trying to get the networks too. And we just got to the Democrats need to look at some of this and go, is this really good for the American consumer? But this also ties into what I was talking about with the tariff money, right? When the tariff money gets refunded to these companies, are they going to be using it to help the consumer? No, more than likely their uh, top execs are either going to get bonuses, or if it gets returned and it's big enough, they may use it for more acquisitions. Well, okay, suddenly we just got a big influx of cash. Well, we've been wanting to buy that smaller company for a while. Let's buy them, right? They need to be looking into doing some of that across the board and trying to fix things. Now, I don't know what the Supreme Court is going to ultimately uh, do with these tariffs, but I just don't think that they side with Donald Trump. Now, we're watching and waiting for that. But that's not the only thing the Supreme Court is dealing with. Now, Supreme Court has decided to take up this case on birthright citizenship. Now, according to the Trump administration, what they want to do or how they are reading the uh, 14th Amendment, which says all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of both the United States and the state in which they reside. Pretty cut and dry. You get citizenship at birth. But Donald Trump is trying to change that. He wants it to be that you only get citizenship if one parent is already a US citizen when you were born on US soil, or if both parents are, of course. Um, but if neither parent is a US citizen or a legal resident, that your citizenship would be denied. Now, so far, the courts have all said that is not how that works. And I don't know if the Supreme Court is going to decide this case. Now, I mean, if they're going to decide it in Donald Trump's favor, I just don't see how they go along with that. It was decided way back in 1898 that the language of the 14th Amendment is pretty clear that what it means by being born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction, it basically means as long as you are not a member of an invading army, or that you are not subject to diplomatic immunity. Basically, if you can be prosecuted by the United States for crimes if you commit them, and you are required to, pay taxes or file something saying you're not supposed to pay taxes or whatever the case may be, but they have subject to tax you and they can arrest you and punish you, then you would be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, it sounds like what they are saying is that it wouldn't be retroactive, but of course we don't know how the Supreme Court would rule. And you would create one hell of a mess. How far back do you go? How many generations back must you prove that you had citizenship if they decide to go with Donald Trump? I just don't think they will. But I think the reason they actually took up this case was just so that they could put a decision on it and say um, that they decided a birthright citizenship case instead of just yielding to the lower court. Now they may try to shore up some things, but I don't know. I don't know how they're going to rule. We're going to have to wait and see what the oral arguments look like in that case and how it looks like the justices are leaning, because you can get an idea from how they ask their questions as to which way they are trying to decide on a case. But we're watching that. We're going to watch and see. I don't know when the oral arguments are, and they probably won't have a decision out on that until the end of their term, which is typically May, June, early July. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. Now, if they say, oh, yeah, Donald Trump can certainly change the meaning of jurisdiction thereof by executive order, and that executive orders can limit constitutional amendments and how they're interpreted, then they'd better be careful. The Republicans may get exactly what they wanted in this case by being able to limit who gets birthright citizenship. Of course, the next Democratic president would just undo that executive order and re-grant everybody retroactive citizenship, probably, and change it. But not only that, they could turn around and say, well, the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the protection of a free state, the right for the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, means that it is because we may have to draw up a militia. And since we don't need a militia, we have a standing army. We're going to start putting a whole bunch of limits on people as far as having access to firearms. Could happen. Republicans would lose their damn minds if that was the case, but it could happen. That's the whole deal here. I mean, you don't want to be able to change the definitions and the meanings of constitutional amendments by executive order. We change presidents potentially every 4, at most every 8 years. And every time we switch presidents, you don't want to have a new president come in, start signing a bunch of executive orders and changing what the Constitution means and how it's interpreted all of the time. The whole point of judicial review is to make sure that executive orders and laws and all of those things fit within the framework of what that Constitution says. And if it can just be changed like that and their interpretations changed every 4 years when we get a new president with the stroke of a pen and an executive order, it really weakens the document and really makes it harder for anybody to understand and know what's going on. There's also an ironic thing when it comes to deciding the birthright citizenship argument. Under the initial reading of, or the way citizenship used to work, it was usually only landowners who were considered citizens and had the right to vote. Um, it wasn't until the passing of the 14th Amendment that certain groups of people were even granted citizenship or legal status and viewed as equal or attempted to be viewed as equal. And there are members of the Supreme Court who wouldn't have been deemed citizens, especially with voting right privileges, that there would have been four or five members of the Supreme Court, the majority of the court, under the way the initial document was written, wouldn't have had voting privileges. They were only granted those privileges through other amendments. And that's kind of ironic that they're looking into that. Now, um, beyond that, we are waiting for these grand jury transcripts to be released from a judge in Florida. Now, this is on the Jeffrey Epstein case, okay? Jeffrey Epstein was charged by a grand jury, or going to be charged by a grand jury in Florida on state level charges way back in 2007. Now, these state level charges, they ultimately passed on them because once they got into it and they realized how massive the enterprise was that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in, they realized they had to do something. And that something was pass it on to the feds. Now, that would have been the uh, DOJ under the George W. Bush administration, then going into Obama. And they ultimately passed on it. The feds investigated. That's where Jeffrey Epstein got that sweetheart deal where he really didn't do any prison time and he was out on work release and all of those kind of things. And with that, all of this information is going to be coming out to see the light of day. Now, that investigation, once they dug into it, they just went, oh shit, there are thousands and thousands of victims, hundreds, if not thousands, of clients. They realized it was too massive of a case for state level. And the only reason these transcripts are even going to be released is twofold. One, it's because it was turned over to the DOJ and made a federal investigation. And two, that law that was passed about 20 days ago, that would have required, or that does require the federal government to release all of the Jeffrey Epstein information. It's forcing the DOJ to release it all. Now, Donald Trump had told Congress to vote on it and to pass it with like 2 days to go before the vote, but he was trying very hard not to. He had been fighting it at every step of the way. He was fighting it every step of the way, trying to prevent it. And then once he realized it was going to pass, he comes out and says, "Go ahead and vote for it. It's fine. I want you to vote for it." And then when he saw the momentum, what I really thought he was going to happen, he expected to happen, is that the House was going to pass it. Okay, and I don't think he expected him to pass it 427-1. Um, but he thought the House was going to pass it. And then when it got through the House, it was going to get to the Senate, and the Senate was going to take months and months to decide it. Well, they didn't. They passed it within a day, within hours, actually. And Donald Trump had no choice but to sign it because if he didn't sign it, it would have become law anyway. Well, now he is trying to sit there and spin it and try to get out of it. And they were going after the DOJ. DOJ was trying to get these transcripts released, but they weren't trying very hard. And I think their goal was to have an attempt on these files, on these transcripts to be released, for the judges to say, well, that's not how we do things. Grand jury transcripts are sealed. And then for them to come out and go, well, we tried to release the evidence from the grand juries and judges said no, so we tried to comply. And they were trying to do that, I guess, even ahead of the vote, because they were trying to use that as a way of saying, well, we tried to release the evidence. Problem is, you don't take all of your evidence to a grand jury. You just need enough evidence to convince the grand jury that there was a crime that was committed. Now, prosecutors do not need to go to the grand jury at all. Okay, there's nothing that requires a grand jury for an indictment for charges. Okay, usually prosecutors make that decision on their own. Where they use grand juries are usually sometimes in tough cases where it's, maybe sketchy, um, where maybe the evidence is, it's like, well, I don't know if we should or shouldn't, and they don't want to be the one to make that decision, or in high profile cases. Um, I took a business law class multiple years ago. We talked about grand juries. This is where I'm getting my information from. And we talked about the way they work and how all of this goes. And there was a case decades ago here in Iowa where a parent left their child in a car in the summer heat, and the child passed, and it was a stupid mistake. I don't remember all of the details now, but it was something like the parent who normally doesn't go to daycare and drop the kid off was supposed to do it that day or something like that, and kid was asleep in the car. They went to work, forgot completely, and kid didn't make it. I don't know. I don't remember all of the details, but the prosecutor for that jurisdiction took the case to the grand jury because they didn't want to charge this person and be the one in the media for saying, okay, we made the choice to charge him for this horrific accident. So they took the case to the grand jury. Grand jury ultimately did not bring back charges, basically said the parents suffered enough and that the family suffered enough. They don't need to go through a trial and all of that. And whether you agree or not, the prosecutor stuck with that decision. And that's the kind of cases that prosecutors will use. In this high profile case with Jeffrey Epstein, they would go to the grand jury in some cases. That way, they would be able to prove that it wasn't politically motivated, right? That, oh, well, they didn't charge Jeffrey Epstein because they wanted to charge Epstein. They charged him because the grand jury said to, because they proved enough evidence. Well, when you go to a grand jury, you only need to take them enough evidence to show that yes, there's a case here that could go to trial. That's all it is. So if you think of it as like a teeter totter, right, or a scale, you just got the balance here. You just got to kind of shift it 51% of the way, just enough to say that yeah, we should at least attempt this at a trial. That it's more likely than not that this person did the thing we're accusing him of, and they should stand trial. Now remember, in the United States, you have the presumption of innocence. The burden of proof resides on the prosecution. But in the grand jury, the burden of proof is not the same level of burden as a criminal trial. You're just trying to convince the grand jurors that this should at least see a trial, right? There's enough to say, well, maybe this person did the thing we're accusing. We should present everything we have at trial. And not always does even everything get admitted at trial. Then they would go to trial. They charge Jeffrey Epstein, but they would only bring in enough evidence to convince the grand jury that they should go to trial. They wouldn't bring in everything they have. Then they go to trial, and they still may not bring everything they have at a trial, right? They would bring enough to get the conviction, but they may keep things back potentially that they could use, either that are they think wouldn't be enough evidence. Maybe they have something better, or maybe they have stuff that would connect other people that they could use. While it may not impact the decision against, say, Epstein, it may impact the decision against a co-conspirator. So the DOJ has way more evidence than what would just be in this grand jury transcript. but these would normally be sealed. They're going to be released, and that's just going to keep the pressure on Donald Trump and this administration. Um, Ultimately, I think when the Epstein files come out in about, what is it, 11 days from now, at least that's when it's supposed to. We're not going to have all of the answers right away. There's going to be a lot of time spent digging through the grand jury testimony, right? They're going to be digging through not just the grand jury testimony, but all of the evidence from the DOJ. They're going to be digging through all of it, and it's going to take a while before we know everything that is in those files. It could take years, years. But we need to start looking, and it's not going to be as simple as one document or one spreadsheet that has just um, the names of all of the clients. I doubt Jeffrey Epstein just kept a spreadsheet that had like John Doe, insert whatever name you want, but client number one and victim name, victim name, victim name, victim name with like a number of times, right? It's not going to be that simple. There's going to be other records, other details, whether that's text messages, whether that's emails, whether that's videotape, whatever that may be. Now, the only thing that is going to be redacted from at least the grand jury testimony that they saw is going to be the names of the victims. Now, if the victims themselves want to come forward and say, well, this piece of evidence was talking about me, I know about that, and go from there, they can. But the government's at least going to try to protect the names of the victims, which they should. Now, Mike Johnson would have told you before that vote, or even after the vote, that the clients are just as much victims of Epstein. And they're not. They were guilty for doing what they were doing. The only way you could consider them victims is if you consider any blackmail that Epstein did after the fact, but it doesn't change the fact of what they did. So Donald Trump is nervous about these files coming out. There's going to be more information leaked, and as more and more pressure comes on, Republicans are going to have to make a choice. Now, I think that Republicans are going to be using the Epstein files, I say this a lot, as their vehicle, as their method to get rid of Donald Trump. As much as the MAGA base doesn't want to turn on Donald Trump for anything ever, they still want to protect children. Okay? They do care about kids. That is one of the things they talk about a lot when it comes to anything. It's always, well, what are we going to tell our kids? How are we going to explain that to our kids? Specifically, when it comes to members of the LGBTQIA plus community. And when they do that, you know, they're like, well, how should we explain it? And the simple answer would be, you just say they're two people who are in love. They exist, and kids will go, okay. Most of the time, it's not until the kids have developed any sort of an idea, and they get those ideas from their parents. Those things are taught, right? Just like racism. Racism is taught. And I worked with a guy a couple of years ago, young kid, teenager, and we had an African American working with us at the time, and they were talking about something, or I don't know. The guy came up joking. I don't even know the whole context anymore. But in the course of what seemed to be a friendly conversation, the African American guy put his hand, like, just clapped the guy on the back or whatever, very innocent thing. And the guy that was the young kid pulls back, looks the guy right in the face, and goes, "If you or your people ever touch me ever again, I will unalive you." And you don't come up with that kind of a mentality on your own. That was taught, right? Kids who don't understand the LGBTQIA or come up believing the negative things about that, That's taught. And if you teach them that these people exist, it's not that big of a deal. But going back to where my point was coming from, um, with the MAGA voters care about children. They don't, and they're pissed about these Epstein files. They want them released. They are trying desperately to get them released. That's one of the things Donald Trump can't understand. He's used to telling his base whatever he can say, and they would just eat it up. They would go for it, no problem. And they're not doing that with these files. They're not believing him that there's nothing to see here. They want them released. Now, they're desperate to have them released because they are convinced they are going to find nothing but Democrats in those files. I don't think that's going to be the case. Now, with releasing the files, some people are thinking that Pam Bondi is going to be trying to do something to mess it up and only release things on Democrats and things like that. And if they try to redact too much, there are people in Congress who have already said they've seen the files and they would read the client names on the House floor. And I hope they do. But beyond that, like I was just talking about, we have this grand jury transcript. We don't know what's in that grand jury testimony. But if there's anything identifying any potential clients in there, if it doesn't match what was brought up from the uh, the DOJ, this administration is going to look dumb. So I think if they try to fuck around with the files too much, we've already heard Republicans saying they're going to try to read the names of the clients on the House floor and that they're pushing for it and they know what should be in the files. If this administration fucks around too much, I think the Republicans are going to use it as a way to get rid of Donald Trump. I think they can sell it to their voters that this is how we move past Donald Trump. That look, he's connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, whether that means he was a client, some people are suggesting because of Donald Trump owning Miss Teen USA, the beauty pageant. And Donald Trump talked about on the at varying points because he owned the beauty pageant, he could just walk in when they were changing. That was one of the perks of being the owner. They just let you do it. Well, of course they let you walk in. What are they going to tell you? No, because then what are you going to say? Well, you're just out of the competition, or you're going to tell the judges, yeah, they were they wouldn't do this or they wouldn't do that. Make sure you mark them lower, something like that. Of course, they were going to just allow it. And some people have suggested the idea, and this may come out in the files, we will have to see that Donald Trump was using the beauty pageants as a way of recruiting for Epstein. Again, we will have to see what ultimately ends up being there. But I think Republicans may end up using the files as their method to get rid of Donald Trump, that they bring up articles of impeachment on Donald Trump. Now, it wouldn't take very many Republicans to end up having to side with all Democrats in the House to bring up charges. But because Republicans have the majority and Republicans would have to sign off on this, I don't think they make that move unless they know 100% that they have the votes in the Senate to get rid of Donald Trump. Now, if they know they have the votes and they bring up articles of impeachment against Donald Trump, I fully expect, as long as Republicans are in the majority in the House of Representatives, for there to be a conviction in the Senate. Now, if after the midterms, if this goes on that far out, and I don't think it will, but if Donald Trump is still in power after the midterms and Democrats have the House and they flip the House by 40 or 50 seats, which is possible, beyond possible, um, if Democrats have control of the House after the midterms and they impeach Donald Trump, it's less of a guarantee that they have the votes. But then it's going to be more about embarrassing Republicans again and getting names on votes, and it's going to be more political. I mean, don't get me wrong, the ultimate goal would be removing Donald Trump, but it would be less of a guarantee if the Democrats were in control of the House. So I think if they have the votes, you will see a conviction in the Senate if the Republicans are in control of the House and the Senate when they bring the charges forward. Now, Donald Trump potentially could get made an offer like Nixon. Uh, they went to Nixon during the Watergate investigation and they said, "Hey, President Nixon, you need to resign. We have the votes to remove you. You need to resign. And we will convict you in the Senate. We have the votes." And he did, and he got a pardon almost immediately from President Ford. Now, would Donald Trump accept a pardon? If he was in his right mind, maybe, because Donald Trump would see it as a way out, that he wouldn't be going to prison for his connection to Epstein. Because that's one of the things Donald Trump is scared of more than anything. He doesn't want to go to jail. He doesn't want to go to prison. That's the whole reason he ran for president in the first place. Basically, he ran, he announced that he was running for president about the time they said they were looking into January 6th. And all of his election denial claims and all of it. And he was worried about going to prison. So he said, "Nope, not doing that. I'm going to run for president." Well, he does that and then turns around and wins. But his whole goal wasn't to win the presidency; it was to stay out of prison. So, if he got offered a pardon, would he take it? Maybe, but he's also not in his right mind. He still thinks that he's got a chance to beat this. And because of the dementia and everything else, I don't know if they can convince him of it. Now, maybe they could, and they could find a way to frame it in such a way that he thinks he's going to look like the hero and he's going to look like that he could spin the narrative and blame other people. Um, and that's possible. But ultimately, I think he's going to end up finding his way out the door, possibly by Republicans. Now, we've got another situation going on here. Donald Trump has been issuing a lot of pardons, and we've been questioning why he's pardoning certain people. Well, last week or so, he pardoned this Henry Cuellar, this Democratic representative who is still in the House of Representatives, who was convicted of uh, fraud and things like that. Now, the House has not voted to expel him, which is weird because they did vote to expel under Republicans George Santos, who was a Republican, who was under fire for um, fraud and things like that. Different types of fraud, but fraud. And they kicked him out. But Henry Cuellar, a Democrat, was not kicked out. Now, because of appeals and things, he had not started his prison term yet, and there were still appeals and things going on. Well, Donald Trump comes out and pardons him, and everybody was wondering why. Why would he pardon this guy? Well, first we thought maybe it was money. Maybe Donald Trump got something out of it, like because this guy was deep into fraud, maybe he got a payout or something like that. But then something else happened. Henry Cuellar comes out after about a week from the pardon and going, "Well, yeah, I'm still in Congress. I'm running for reelection, and I'm running as a Democrat." And then it started to kind of make a little more sense. Donald Trump was hoping this pardon was going to get either Cuellar to resign, that was a possibility, or that he was going to run as a Republican, or maybe even switch parties outright, and that would be a Republican pickup seat in the House of Representatives. It seems like it was more about him gaming the system and trying to gain another representative in Congress. They've got such a thin majority. We've been talking about what could happen and how the math is actually working out that even though Afton Bain did not win in Tennessee when Afton Bain ran for that special election, because of how she shrunk the lead that Donald Trump had in that district, it was a 22 percentage point Republican district, and they only won, or Afton Bain lost by less than 9 by moving the goal 30 or 13%. There's a lot of districts that are Republican led right now that were the Republican led by less than 13% in their vote. If Democrats can pick up 13% consistently across the board, that's why I say they could take the House by 40 or 50 seats. But we're also hearing other members of Congress, Republicans, are talking about maybe resigning, retiring. Some even talking about retiring early, like Marjorie Taylor Greene did, and how it could be possible for the Democrats to get control of the House early. Well, Donald Trump is scared of losing the House of Representatives at all, right? He doesn't want to lose the House. He doesn't want to lose it before the midterms. He doesn't want to lose it in the midterms or anything. So when he does this, he pardons this Cuellar, hoping, I think, that either he was not going to run for reelection, taking the incumbency out of it, or that he was going to end up switching parties. Or maybe he was going to announce that, well, I'm going to be a Democrat till the end of this term, and then next election I will run as a Republican. Something like that. I think that's what Donald Trump really wanted to do, trying to shore up his majority, because he's scared of losing the House. Because if he loses the House, Republicans have all they've said it. Donald Trump, I believe, has said it. Mike Johnson has said it. Several other Republicans have said if they lose the House, Donald Trump would get impeached again. Democrats have already talked about, and they've tried to bring votes forward to impeach Donald Trump this term several times. Now, Donald Trump is terrified of that impeachment happening for the third time. He would be a 3-time impeached president. Now, granted, he already holds the record. No president has ever been impeached twice. But 3 would probably be an all-time record, and I don't know if it would ever be broken. And the third time may be the charm for Republicans to finally say, oh, fuck this shit, especially after the midterms. If he costs them the House by 40 to 50 seats, and if I'm right and he ends up losing the Senate as well, that Republicans may just say, enough of this guy, we've got to move on in 28 to J.D. Vance. We've got to do something here. So he pardoned Cuellar, hoping to game the system. And that's Republicans' MO. They can't win on policy. If they could win on policy consistently, they wouldn't have to do things like gerrymander the fuck out of these states. Texas gerrymanders out 5 democratically controlled districts, okay, trying to make and game the system. Just talking about Afton Bain gaining 13 percentage points and flipping seats. Well, because of moving voters around, those seats in Texas, some of the ones that they have re-gerrymandered now no longer have a 63% Republican base. If Democrats pick up 13% in those new districts where they've been restructured, guess what? They could save the 5 seats that were flipped, and they could even pick up a few. This could end up backfiring spectacularly, and Republicans are scared. But they can't win on policy. They have to do things like trying to gerrymander and trying to make it harder to vote and all of those things. If they could win on policy, they wouldn't have to resort to those tricks. I've always said Donald Trump is transactional. He doesn't do things unless he gains something. And now we are seeing what that something was, at least with the Cuellar pardon. And as time goes on, some of the other pardons are going to be made more clear as well. When it comes to anything and everything Donald Trump is doing, these transactions, we are going to figure out what he is attempting to gain by doing certain things. Now, speaking of transactional, FIFA comes in and they are doing the World Cup in the United States next year. They want it to go off without a hitch. So what do? They give Donald Trump a participation trophy. He's been wanting a Nobel Peace Prize for so long that it is not funny. He thinks he deserves one because Barack Obama got one. And of course, he thinks he is better than Obama. Of course, he thinks he's better than anybody, really, and that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, he didn't get it this year, and of course, he's not going to get it because how do you get a peace prize when you're blowing up boats in the Caribbean coming from Venezuela that are supposed drug boats, but then they're not even doing it the right way. Like I've said before, they should let the boats get to the United States waters, seize the boat, search it, get the contraband, arrest, and charge these people. That's how you know. Like until you prove it with evidence, you have just speculation, and now you're committing murder doing this. So one, how do you get a peace prize by blowing up boats? And how do you get a peace prize when you're talking about sending the military into democratically run cities for training purposes and all sorts of things? You don't. So the Nobel Committee isn't giving him a peace prize. So what does FIFA do? Well, they create the FIFA Peace Prize. Okay, they show up and it's this little dinky medal. Um, and of course, he's crowing about how he got a peace prize. And they give him this FIFA Peace Prize, right? And they did it so that next year's FIFA World Cup goes off without a hitch. Because how do you get to Donald Trump? You give him something. You give him a gift and you compliment him and you pat him on the back and you tell him he's a genius. That's how you always have dealt with Donald Trump. That's what you saw in his first term. Not maybe to this extent, but that's how you deal with somebody like Donald Trump. You come up, oh man, Donnie, you're a genius. You know, I wouldn't have thought of doing it like that way. Or you can put ideas into his head. Man, you know, if we'd only do this, whoever would be smart enough to do it this way would look like a real genius. And then he goes, "Oh, I could look like a genius. I'm a genius. I could do that," and he does. Donald Trump is transactional at best, incompetent at worst, and you know, a bunch of other things in between. Um, but FIFA did that. They gave him this peace prize as a way of smoothing things over, hoping that next year goes off without a hitch. So then they're hoping that they don't get hit with, you know, ice raids and things like that, and that their teams are not prohibited from entering the country and all kinds of things. And this will work for a while. Then Donald Trump, of course, is going to want something more. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if next year, if I don't know when they're doing the FIFA World Cup as far as what part of the year, but if they have the World Cup and it's here before December next year, which I think they will, um, that next year we don't hear about another recipient of the FIFA Peace Prize unless it's Donald Trump again. And then after Donald Trump is out of office, I bet we never hear of it again. I bet it goes away. I bet it becomes something that it's going to be one of those weird things that happened once or twice and it was just a thing. Now, Donald Trump is, of course, happier than a clam that he could get this prize. But then I heard something funny came out yesterday. I think it was yesterday, or it was early morning today, one of the two. That Joe Biden has actually been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, Donald Trump has been nominated by other people as well. It doesn't take a lot to get nominated. But they nominated Joe Biden. And how funny would it be if Joe Biden wins the Nobel Peace Prize when he's no longer president for his actions while president around the guy who is actively campaigning to win it? Donald Trump has been trying to campaign to win this Nobel Prize going back to his first term. He thinks he deserves it, mostly because he thinks Barack Obama doesn't. But um, Donald Trump is so desperate to win something peace related that he took the FIFA prize. And now, if next October, if it comes out that Joe Biden is the winner, if Donald Trump is still with us at that point, you can expect him to go into a tailspin. It is going to be ridiculous. It is going to be funny to watch him crashing out from it. Um, and it is going to be just another thing that drives him closer and closer to that final break where he finally loses touch with reality completely. It's getting closer, and when that happens, Republicans are going to have to move on Donald Trump, despite the fact they really don't want to. So that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast today for Monday. I'm going to be back tomorrow from what I've seen of news stories for today, there's going to be a lot to talk about tomorrow. So I hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.